Draco Malfoy and the Truth of the Heart. By Draco will hear about this. Chapter 23. New Beginnings. What in Merlin's name is this monstrosity? Draco demanded, hands on his hips, staring pointedly at the strange misshapen black box Fred and George had dropped off in their living room. Don't ask us, Fred snorted. It's a gift from Dad, George added. He said Harry would know. Draco slowly turned to Harry, who was standing in the kitchen, sorting dishes into cupboards with a sheepish expression on his face. It's a television, he offered, as if that explained everything. A what? Draco asked flatly. It's Muggle, Harry shrugged. It works on electricity, and we can't have electricity here, Harry. It won't work. It's electricity, and don't worry about Arthur fiddled with it, and it now runs on magic. It's his moving in present for us. And you're sure it's safe? Draco asked dubiously, glancing at the ominous device. What does it even do? I trust Arthur, and it plays films and shows. You'll like it, it's relaxing. Draco very much doubted that, but he decided to leave the matter alone for now. With another glare at the thing, he picked up another box from the entranceway and carried it over to the kitchen. Their house looked like Pandora's box had been opened within and its curse had been released. People were walking around everywhere trying to be helpful, with varying degrees of success. Only 10 minutes ago, Draco had to break apart a fight that included Ginny, Ryan, and their toiletries. Meanwhile, Luna had insisted on painting Teddy's room, and Draco had relented because A, it was easier than leading a discussion he couldn't possibly win, and B, she was actually talented. He was pretty sure Abbas and Killian were just making out upstairs from the flush on their faces the last time he had passed the guest room, but he was not going to go check on them. The doorbell rang, and Draco sighed. He put the box he was carrying down next to Harry for him to unpack and went to open the door. He found his mother on the doorstep surrounded by more boxes. Oh, gee, more things to unpack. Hello, Mother, he sighed, and she smiled at his lack of enthusiasm. How is moving day going, dear? She asked kindly. It is what it is, he shrugged. He waved his wand, and the boxes stacked themselves in the entranceway with the others. Thanks for all your help. Don't you worry, darling. She waved him off. I'm just glad you like it here. You and Harry should have somewhere to go home. He smiled, and they lingered in awkward silence for a couple of moments. Things had been strange between him and his mother ever since the final battle, and Draco hated it. Then again, he couldn't understand why his mother bothered with his father. Every time he thought about it, his temper flared, so he tried not to. I brought you everything I thought you might want from the manor. Narcissa shrugged eventually, clearly attempting to fill the silence. Of course, you're free to peruse it yourself, should you want to. I'm never going back there. Draco cut her off, his tone hard. His mother sighed, looking unhappy. It's still your family home, she breathed. You will inherit it eventually. I don't want it, Draco shrugged. It's just a house, Draco, his mother whispered. The fact that the Dark Lord resided there can't taint it permanently. You're right, Draco snapped. It's just a house. Why should I care what happens to it? Narcissa looked at him sadly. I know you don't want to be, but you still are the heir to the Malfoy family. You will inherit the manor and your father's fortune. You have to... I want no part of him! Draco clarified, his voice cold. Not his money, not his house, nothing! Is that understood? And with that he turned and picked up one of the boxes. He made his way towards his study and slammed the door shut behind him. The silence and solitude of the room were grounding. He set the box down and opened it, staring at all the books his mother had chosen to bring from the manor library. He closed it again and went over to one of his own boxes, deciding to unpack those. Right now, everything from the manor felt tainted, even though his mother said it was just his imagination. Harry came to find him a long time later. He was sure that at least an hour had passed. He had managed to unpack all of his boxes, and had even started on the one from the manor, glaring at each and every book in the presses. Hey. Harry smiled at him softly as he entered the room. You okay? Yeah, Draco shrugged. How are things going out there? Did our friends burn down the house already? Not yet. Harry grinned. Ginny brought over dinner from Molly. She was clearly worried we'd starve to death on our first night without supervision. He chuckled. You want to come and eat? Sure, Draco nodded, putting away the book he was holding. Outside, most of the chaos had indeed vanished. Their friends were gathered around the dining table or in the kitchen, handing out dishes, chatting, and laughing. You could smell steak and kidney pie. Honestly, that many people at one table were almost too many people for Draco's comfort zone, but they were all his friends and no one was too pushy, so we suffered through it okay. The only time the attention was fully on him was when they toasted to their engagement and Luna wanted to see the ring. "It's so pretty," she told him solemnly, "and black diamonds keep the narcles away."
"Why, that's why I suggested it," Ryan called, grinning. "I'm just looking out for you, mate."
"Don't tell me you took him ring shopping," Draco asked Harry, slightly appalled.
"I asked Ginny," Harry pointed out. "Ryan sort of came as a package deal."
"He did end up finding the ring, though," Ginny sharked, grinning. "He's the pure-blood Slytherin, after all. He knew what to look for."
"I guess he did," Draco blinked, surprised at the realization.
"I'm offended at the lack of trust." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "I have brilliant taste. Just look at my girlfriend."
"I'll give you that." Draco smiled and Ryan winked. Draco and Harry had their first appointment with Healer Jones on a Tuesday morning. Harry's appointment was the first, so we left the house ahead of Draco, leaving Draco to nervously sip his morning tea alone until it was time for him to leave. The office looked like no medical office Draco had ever been to. The waiting room was furnished with plush armchairs in warm colors, and shelves lined the walls, showing off books and magazines dealing with various topics concerning mental health for the patients to peruse, as well as flyers and decorative knickknack. Motivational posters hung the walls. One said, "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, Arthur Ashe." Another, "Just because no one else can heal or do your inner work for you doesn't mean you can, should, or need to do it alone, Lisa Oliveira." The woman at the reception gave Draco a questionnaire to fill out. He frowned down at the questions, considering them with some trepidation. In the first column, the questionnaire asked if the patient had suffered from a variety of physical issues, none of which applied to Draco, so he skipped them entirely. Then he came across the column which asked, "During the past week, did you suffer from feeling down or depressed?" Draco gulped. His fingers trembled a little as he crossed off the field next to the text. He continued, crossing off points like worry, disturbed sleep, indefinable feelings of fear, and listlessness. The next paragraph read, "During the last week, did you feel..." Here Draco found, much to his dismay, that more answers seemed fitting than in the last one. "Tense? Check. Easily irritated? Check. Frightened? Check. That everything is meaningless? Bloody hell, check. That you just can't do anything anymore? Check. That life is not worthwhile?" Draco put his pen down, taking a deep breath. No, he told himself, he was not going to walk out of here. He had promised Harry. Harry was the reason why the answer to this was no, he reminded himself. With shaking hands, he picked up the pen again and left that field uncrossed. That you can no longer take any interest in the people and things around you. Check. That you can't cope anymore? No check. He could cope. He had Harry. He could do this. And as much as it felt right now that he was losing against a stupid questionnaire, he was stronger than this. That you would be better off if you were dead? Next! That you can't enjoy anything anymore? Draco aggressively checked that one off. That you are a disappointment to the people around you? Another check. The next paragraph was headed off, "During the past week." But Draco found, much to his relief, that it wasn't half as bad as the last one. He checked off stray columns like, "Did you easily become emotional?" Or, "Did you ever have fleeting images of any upsetting events that you have experienced?" As well as, "Did you ever have to do your best to put aside thoughts of any upsetting events?" When he was done, he hesitated for a moment before handing the questionnaire back to the lady at the front desk. She smiled at him as she received it. Then he sat back down, waiting. Eventually, the door to the practitioner room opened, and Harry stepped out. Draco heard him thank Healer Jones before he closed the door behind himself. Then he turned the corner to peek into the waiting room, smiling at Draco. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Draco returned. "How was it?" "Good. Harry nodded encouragingly.
She's nice. I think you'll like her.
Okay, Draco said. He was kneading his fingers, and he knew Harry could tell that he was nervous. He stepped into the room, bending down to kiss his forehead.
I'm glad we're doing this, he whispered. I'm proud of you for agreeing to it. I know this isn't easy, but I think it will be good for us.
Draco nodded. He held Harry's eyes for a moment before his name was called. Healer Jones was a small but big woman in her 40s. She smiled and shook Draco's hand as he entered the room, gesturing for him to take a seat. Draco took a moment to take in the room. It was similarly decorated as the waiting room, with bookshelves, plush armchairs, a love seat, and a coffee table. Healer Jones had taken one of the armchairs, and Draco took the other, trying to get comfortable, though he felt incredibly tense. He spied his questionnaire on the healer's clipboard, finding that she had taken notes and counted out a score. Draco wondered what her diagnosis was. "Mr. Malfoy," she said. Her tone was pleasant, friendly, not in the way people were when they were trying to glaze over bad news or when they were trying to sell something, but when they were honestly trying to make someone feel comfortable. "I'm glad to finally meet you in person. Of course, Mr. Potter has told me some things about you, but I try not to make a picture of my patients until I meet them myself." "I see," Draco nodded, licking his lips. "From what I gathered, it was your partner's wish that you start therapy," she said. "Usually we encourage patients to make up their own minds. We think it's less effective if they aren't here of their own accord. So for starters, if you don't mind, I'd like you to tell me why you think you should be here. I know Mr. Potter's reasons for making your appointments. I'd like to hear your reasons for going along with his idea." Draco frowned. He took a moment to gather his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was unsure. "Well, I know Harry is very worried about me," he began, "and I don't know how to explain to him what's wrong with me or how to fix myself. So I thought if this soothed him, I might give it a try." "So you do feel that something is wrong with you?" she asked, picking up Draco's rhetoric. "It's not just your partner seeing things." "No," Draco shook his head, "but I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to explain it to you, so I'm not sure how effective this will be. I know this whole thing," he gestured to the room at large, "is based largely on conversation, and if I can't express my issues, how is it supposed to help?" "That's where I come in, Mr. Malfoy," she smiled. "We can work on finding the source of your issues together and help you find a solution to them. The fact that you recognize that something is amiss and are willing to accept the fact and work on it is already a huge step. It shows great strength." "I don't know about that," Draco frowned. "Oh, but it does," she smiled. "I looked at your questionnaire, for example. You did well articulating what you felt here." She looked at him. "Can you tell me what it was like for you filling out that questionnaire?" Draco gulped. He frowned. "Is it strange if I say it was stressful?" "Not at all." She shook her head. "Can you tell me why?" "I'm not sure," Draco shrugged. "It's just... sometimes it felt like the answers were almost taunting me, if that makes sense." "It's not easy accepting that we have a problem," Healer Jones said gently. "And these questions are meant to draw out all your truths, no matter how uncomfortable. That's why I said you did well answering truthfully. You could have walked away. You didn't." "I thought about it," he admitted. "I stayed for Harry." "And that's okay," she assured him. "If loved ones give us the courage to search for help, that's not a weakness. Leaning on others is not a weakness, Mr. Malfoy. You don't have to do this alone." Draco nodded. He waited for her to tell him what his diagnosis was, but she didn't. Instead, she asked, "You told me you think something is wrong with you. Please tell me why you think so." Draco sighed. He tried to gather his thoughts, then he explained, "I should be happy. The war is over, and most people I really care about survived. I am engaged to and living with the love of my life. Everything should be perfect. And yet..." "You're not happy?" she asked. "I feel empty," Draco breathed. "It's hard to feel joy. And when I feel something, it's fear or anger. A lot of anger, actually." "Okay," she nodded. "What are you usually angry about?" My father, he replied without hesitating.
Why your father?
Oh, come on, he scoffed. You read the prophet, I'm sure.
Even if I did, I'd like to hear it from you. She pointed out, her voice calm.
Fine, he sighed. My father just hasn't been a father to me for a long time. He initially punished me for my friendship with Harry, and then he tried to hurt my friends. Then he joined the Dark Lord when he returned and effectively placed himself on the opposite side of this war from me. He stood by when I was tortured, and now everyone acts like I'm just supposed to forgive him.
Who does?
She asked. My mother? He ground out. She went back to him. She keeps asking me to give testimony for him or to talk to him. We can't have a conversation without her mentioning him.
And that angers you, she commented. Rightfully so, from what you just told me.
I have every right to be angry, Draco insisted. My father hasn't acted like a father. I'm not going to pretend to be a loving son now.
Why does your mother expect you to reconsider your stance? Healer Jones asked.
Because my father didn't give Harry away in front of the Dark Lord in the end, Draco sighed, crossing his arms. He asked him to confirm his death in the forest, and apparently he didn't because he wanted to get to me, but, Draco continued incensed, does one right all the wrongs he's done? Yes, he saved Harry, but he didn't even do it because it was the right thing to do, or because he knew how much I loved him. He did it because he wanted to suck up to me. It was all calculated. What would he have done if I had been dead? Let the Dark Lord kill Harry all over again?
I see your point, she nodded. What does Mr. Potter say?
Harry is going to testify, he huffed. But he says he's doing it so that I don't have to, and that he wouldn't have done it if I had told him not to. I think he hasn't forgiven him, and he won't tell me to either, which is something.
I think your fiancé considers your feelings very much, she nodded, smiling. He seemed very occupied with what you were thinking and feeling. It must feel good to have such support.
Draco bit his lip. He frowned and nodded. I guess so, he said.
You don't sound sure, she observed.
I don't know, he sighed. I feel like I'm just worrying him most of the time. And then there are times when I just... He glanced at his hands. He couldn't say this out loud, could he?
This is a safe space, Malfoy, she told him softly. It will all stay between us.
This sounds horrible, he breathed. But there are times when I don't want him around, or when I don't believe he's being honest.
Can I ask why? She prodded.
Draco hesitated. He took a deep breath and sunk back in his chair. His voice was small when he answered, because deep down I think he doesn't really mean it when he says he loves me.
Where do you take that away from? She asked.
Experience, he laughed humorlessly. But in short, the fact that he left me to go and die during that battle. There was a long silence in which Healer Jones seemed to process his words. I know it's not rational, Draco shook his head, and it's probably not fair towards him.
It's all right, she assured him. It's how you feel. There are no wrong answers here, Mr. Malfoy. I just need you to be honest with me so we can work through the things that are bothering you. This is a real fear you have, and I'd like to work with it. He saw her taking a note. I'd like to revisit this in our next session, Mr. Malfoy. For now, I think I have heard enough to say I have a good picture of the work we have to do. I'd like to meet on a weekly basis, if that is all right with you. Okay, Draco nodded before frowning. What exactly is wrong with me? If you're asking for a diagnosis, she said, I'd say PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, accompanied by a depressive episode. That is something we can work on, though, she stressed. After everything you went through, it is not surprising for you to have taken away some damage. But our minds are not like our body, Mr. Malfoy. We can't just take a potion or cast a spell for it to heal. It takes time and effort. Mental illness is not something the Wizarding Society talks much about. So much of the knowledge mind healers use stem from Muggle psychologists, but that doesn't make it less effective, I assure you. It will take time, but we will get there.
Okay, Draco nodded.
You are allowed to flu me if there is an emergency, and you feel like you need emotional support, she told him. She handed him a card with her flu address. Even if it is outside of our set appointments or office hours, I'd rather you contact me before you find yourself in a situation you can't cope with that might have irrevocable consequences otherwise. Do you understand?
Yes, he nodded.
Good. She smiled. I know if your fiancé is keen on shared sessions, but I don't think they'd be conducive at this point. Eventually, we might go there, but for now, I'd like to speak to both of you separately, if that's okay.
That works perfectly for me. Draco nodded, relieved.
I thought so.
She nodded, a knowing look on her face. She stood, and Draco did too, reaching out to shake her hand.
It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Malfoy. I am looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. Draco nodded. I'll set an appointment at the front desk.
I think Mr. Potter might have already penciled something in.
She winked at him.
But please confirm.
He nodded, and when he left the room, he didn't feel quite as unsteady anymore. Maybe those sessions wouldn't be as bad after all. PTSD. Harry repeated him, watching from across the kitchen counter, where he wiped off the excess water from their wash-up while the dishes sorted themselves back into the cupboards. Draco had told him that he could do it with magic, but Harry liked to do these things by hand. Draco guessed some habits died hard. And depression? A depressive episode is what she called it, Draco pointed out, but I think it comes down to the same thing. I guess so, Harry nodded. Well, we share the PTSD at least, though I had an inkling that there was something more going on with you. You've got PTSD too? Draco asked, surprised. To be fair, I think half of Wizarding Britain's got PTSD these days. Harry rolled his eyes. The difference is that we're smart enough to get it treated. Draco hummed. A part of him had still wondered if Harry was only going along with this so that Draco would go, but it seemed that he had been wrong. It made him feel a little better, and also guilty for even thinking that. Way to be selfish. Harry's whole world didn't revolve around him, after all. He, of all people, knew that. I'm really glad you agreed. Harry smiled at him softly. I know this isn't easy. It's not for me either. But I know it's the right thing to do. Draco nodded. Harry dropped the cloth into the sink and walked around the counter until he could catch Draco by the hips. I mean it, he said earnestly. I'm proud of you. He leaned in to kiss him, gentle and lingering. I love you, he whispered. Draco leaned into the kiss, searching the physical intimacy and the way it made him feel. Harry got the hint and wrapped his arms more firmly around him. Draco hummed into the kiss. Let's go upstairs, he suggested when they pulled away for air. Harry smiled and nodded. They made love for hours, sweet and unrushed, and Draco forgot everything that was wrong with the world. Draco wished he could always live in this particular universe where only Harry and Draco and their bodies existed. Everything would be much simpler that way.